Subscribe because it's free.
The Kalari had never known war. Their civilization, one of scholars, artisans, and dreamers, had flourished in peace for over 10,000 cycles. They had no standing army, no weapons of destruction, no need for violence. Their greatest strength had always been their wisdom and diplomacy. Then the sky turned black. It started as a whisper among the outer colonies. Reports of settlements going silent. Entire biospheres wiped clean of life. The Kalari High Council sent envoys, pleading for answers, but none returned. Then, one by one, the core worlds began to fall. Cities crumbled, oceans boiled, fields of gold turned to barren wastelands overnight. The Kalari, once proud and self-sufficient, were now refugees in their own star system. Their homeworld, Kalare, was the last to stand. A hostile force had unleashed something beyond comprehension, a living bioweapon that consumed everything in its path. It didn't simply kill. It erased. Entire genetic lines, wiped from existence. No records, no fossils, no remnants, as if they had never been. With desperation outweighing pride, the Kalari reached out to the United Council of Sentience, the ruling body of the galactic community. The distress call was sent in all known frequencies, translated into every language of the civilized stars. This is High Chancellor Villain of the Kalari Dominion. We are under siege by an enemy we do not understand. We seek mercy, aid, anything. Please, if there is compassion among the stars, hear us. For 3 rotations, they waited. The first reply came from the Zifri Empire. Cold and efficient, their response was simple. Non-strategic loss. No intervention. The Trelsian Consortium, rulers of the largest trade networks, responded next. Their message was curt. Assistance not profitable. We regret your misfortune. The United Council of Sentience deliberated for a full cycle before responding with carefully measured words. We sympathize with your plight, but cannot compromise interstellar stability for a singular species. The matter is beyond our jurisdiction. The Kalari had pleaded, bargained, and even offered the last of their technology. No one came. It was then, in the silence of the void, that a final transmission arrived. Short, unassuming, barely a whisper across the stars. 2 words. We're coming. Confusion rippled through the Kalari command chamber. The sender? A species so insignificant that most council records barely acknowledge them. Humans. A minor race. Young. Reckless. Barely a century into the stars. The council scoffed at the idea. What could a backwater species do against an unstoppable force? The few records available on them painted a picture of an unpredictable, aggressive race. A species that fought itself as much as it fought the elements. A species that clawed its way from caves to starships in a blink of history's eye. And yet they had answered. High Chancellor Valen read the message again. We're coming. No demands. No negotiations. No bureaucratic calculations of worth. Just a promise. For the first time in Kalari history, they placed their hope in the unknown. The Kalari stood in silence, watching the sky. No one knew what to expect. Would these humans send diplomats? Traders? A small escort ship to assess the situation? Then the darkness above Kalari shattered. The first ship emerged from hyperspace like a jagged spear, its metal hull scarred and battle-worn. Then another, and another. Within moments, an entire fleet materialized, black silhouettes against the dying embers of a world on the brink. But these ships were unlike anything the Kalari had ever seen. They lacked the elegant curves of Zifri vessels or the seamless, efficiency-driven designs of the Trelsian. These were brutes of metal and fire, armor hulls reinforced with layers of plating, engines that roared instead of hummed, weapons that bristled with defiance that spoke of war, not diplomacy. A transmission cut through the static. This is Admiral Callan of the Terran Expeditionary Force. We received your distress signal. Hold your position. We'll handle the rest. The Kalari watched, stunned. No posturing, no demands. Just a statement of action. Then the enemy returned. From the depths of the void, the ones who had sent the bioweapon came to finish their work. Their ships were spectral, like shadows coalescing into jagged, obsidian monstrosities. They did not hail. They did not offer terms. They had no use for words. The Kalari had seen their arrival before, the final step in extermination. This was the moment where hope had always died. Not this time. The moment the enemy fleet arrived, the human ships moved. It wasn't strategy as the Kalari knew it. The great galactic empires calculated battles like intricate equations. Every move premeditated, every strike precise. But humans? They charged. A Kalari observer gasped as the first human destroyer, outnumbered 5-1, accelerated straight into the enemy lines. Its weapons lit up the void, cannon fire tearing through the dark vessels before it rammed into the largest warship at full speed. A suicide run? No, because as the ship broke apart, escape pods fired in every direction. Its crew already gone, already fighting from elsewhere. The humans didn't just attack. They threw themselves into the jaws of destruction and forced the enemy to choke on them. For the first time, the enemy hesitated. They had expected compliance, surrender, a species too afraid to resist. Instead, they faced something they had never encountered before, a species that fought not for conquest, not for gain, but simply because someone had to. The Kalari watched as human soldiers stormed the ground, engaging the bioweapon head-on with flamethrowers, kinetic rifles, and explosives. The galaxy had long abandoned such crude tools, favoring drones and indirect warfare. But the humans fought with their hands. They bled, they died, and still they pushed forward. Chancellor Valen stared at the screen, barely able to comprehend what he was seeing. The finest civilizations in the galaxy had dismissed his people, calling their extinction an inevitability. But here, now, these strange creatures, these humans, had arrived with no stake, no reward, and no hesitation. Valen turned to the human officer beside him, a battle-worn soldier coordinating the chaos from the command center. "Why?" the Chancellor asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this for us?" The officer didn't look up from the battlefield reports. He simply tightened his grip on his rifle and muttered, because no one else would. The battle raged for hours, stretching into days. The humans fought like creatures possessed, refusing to yield even when outnumbered, even when wounded, even when the enemy adapted. The bioweapon, a crawling horror of engineered destruction, had never met resistance like this. It devoured flesh, rewriting genetic codes mid-infection, turning victims into ash. The humans learned fast. Their medics worked relentlessly, analyzing the pathogen in real time, developing countermeasures on the battlefield. When energy weapons failed, humans switched to fire and explosives. When the enemy overran trenches, humans fought hand-to-hand. When they couldn't hold the line, they moved it forward. The Kalari could only watch, unable to comprehend the insanity unfolding before them. Every other species they had known relied on strategy, on technology, on logic. The humans relied on will. The cost was terrible. Kalari hospitals overflowed, not with their own wounded, but with human casualties. Soldiers burned, lungs filled with toxic air, bodies torn by enemy claws. Many would never see their home world again. Yet, not one of them retreated. Valen stood in the medical bay, staring at a human soldier barely clinging to life. The man's armor was shattered, his face pale, his breath shallow. A Kalari healer worked desperately, unfamiliar with human physiology, but the injuries were too severe. The Chancellor knelt beside him. "You do not have to do this." The man opened his eyes. They were dull, unfocused, yet something still burned within them. He tried to smile but failed. Someone has to. Then he died. Valen gripped the soldier's hand, staring at the lifeless body of a man who had given everything for a species he had never met, for a people he owed nothing. And yet, the humans fought on. Then the final horror came. A massive enemy warship, unlike anything seen before, entered orbit, carrying a weapon of last resort, an antimatter payload designed to end the battle in a single apocalyptic strike. The Kalari barely had time to comprehend what was happening before human comms went silent. Then one final transmission echoed across the battlefield. A human captain. "Calm. Certain. We'll stop it." The UHS Valiant, a battered, half-destroyed human cruiser, changed course. The Kalari watched in stunned silence as the ship accelerated directly toward the enemy warhead. No hesitation. No attempt to escape. The captain's voice came through one last time. For KLRA. Then the ship struck the payload. The explosion lit the sky, a silent, blinding inferno that split the heavens. When the light faded, the enemy fleet was gone. The war was over, and 3,000 humans were dead. The Kalari wept. They had never known sacrifice like this. The war was over. KLRA still stood. The bioweapon had been eradicated, the enemy fleet annihilated, and yet the cost was unbearable. The humans had bled for a world that was not their own. They had fought, died, and given everything without being asked, without demanding repayment, without seeking reward. The surviving human fleet remained in orbit for 3 more days, assisting in the rebuilding efforts. Their engineers repaired what they could, their medics tended to the wounded, their soldiers buried the dead, Kalari and human alike. Then, without ceremony, the Terran Expeditionary Force prepared to leave. Chancellor Valen stood on the steps of the Grand Hall, watching as the last human transports lifted into the sky. He couldn't let them go. Not like this. He turned to the Kalari Council, a body that had once prided itself on diplomacy, on neutrality, on wisdom, and he saw their shame, their silence. They had called for mercy. The galaxy had turned away. Only the humans had answered. Valen activated the planetary comms. His voice carried across the world. "To the humans of Terra," he said, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "You have done what no other species dared. You fought not for conquest, not for gain, but because it was right, because it was necessary." The human fleet halted. They were listening. The Kalari do not forget. Valen took a breath. "From this day forward, let be known across the stars. Terra has no greater ally than KLRA. Your fight is our fight. Your enemies are our enemies. When you call, we will answer as you answered us." For a long moment, silence. Then, a single response. 2 words. "Acknowledge, Chancellor." Then, the Terran fleet vanished into the void, leaving behind a world forever changed. And across the galaxy, a truth began to spread, whispered in shadowed halls, spoken in fear by those who had turned their backs. The humans had answered call for mercy, and in doing so, they had proven a terrible, undeniable fact. When no one else will stand, when the darkness comes, humans will always go to war.